This week's episode is brought to you by the Double Feature. Something that you can do with 2 movies, 2 books, or recording 2 podcasts in a row. Some double features include Bad Teacher and Friends with Benefits, both with Justin Timberlake. Or when we record 2 episodes of Nexus at night in a row, so that we can have the Tuesday off. Double feature. It's not just for the Rocky Horror fan.
Welcome to Nexus at Night. Now that all of the other meta decks have been restricted in some way, Neo Nectar's probably gonna be next, but because it's the Napoleon of Vanguard, if we try to ban anything from Neo Nectar, it'll probably just walk back in and unban itself.
I'm Atlas.
I'm Matt.
I'm Root Beer.
And I'm James.
And today we are going to talk about something that is very close to our hearts, being Americans and stuff and what's going on in the country right now. We're talking about Xenophobia, which is a Latin word meaning fear of foreigners. And we're not going to be talking about the very loaded question that is politics. We're talking about xenophobia in Vanguard. So...
Wait, I have a question. So, Vanguard is made up of different nations, so is there, racism between the nations at all?
Probably.
I get the feeling that Dimension Police is
distinctly possible.
I get the feeling Dimension Police doesn't like Meta Colony very much. Just a hunch.
They say.
So, aside from the nations being like, alright, you can't use any cards outside of us if you're building the deck because Extreme Fight is dumb, you still have, card designs that are based on archetypes and subclans where your deck building within that nation becomes stilted and limited if you decide to follow it. So we're going to be debating whether this is a good or bad thing for card design, because after the last AL4 set, which James so graciously came on and guested for, it got me a little worried that Bushiroad's going back to subclans, which I wasn't a huge fan of back in the day. Anybody want to just explain what subclans were like back in Break Ride era? Real quick.
Oh, so for the subclan, basically everything becomes about them, right? You're gonna have to pay. Let's just say you had an Eradicator deck, for example. You're gonna have a card that says Counterblast an Eradicator unit, and then it will do a thing, but that thing will probably only apply to Eradicator units as well. Let's just say, hypothetically, you had a card that gave your front row, 5k power, right? It'd be Counterblast 1 Eradicator, retire one of your opponent's rear guards, and then your front row Eradicator units gain 5,000 power, or something like that. Just as an example, because I can't actually think of any real cards off the top of my head.
Me neither. Or there was, the old Gauntlet Buster, wasn't it? Counterblast 2 Eradicators to kill something? Or
yeah. Let's just use Draconic Descendant, because it's right here. So it says, Counterblast 1, discard 3 cards with Eradicator in their card name, and then it can get its restand ability. And then, to gain 5,000 power, you have to Counterblast 2 cards with Eradicator in it, so everything is all about the subclan now.
Yeah, which makes it... I don't know, my problem with subclans is that with card design in the future, it basically gives you a time limit on how effective your subclan is going to be. Because, following a clan, unless it's Murakumo, is at least a little worth it because you can just add to your deck as you go. But when they do a clan within a clan, it means that eventually that character is going to stop being on the show, or they're just going to stop supporting it because they're doing a reboot or whatever.
Yeah.
And then that means that all of those cards kind of become useless. Now, in standard format, they're doing this thing where they're taking old cards and just making new versions of them. So you have the same name, but it's not the same effect, which means that the subclan things ironically came back into chic. In Premium, you can use the Silver Thorn Assistant Zelma, which is Purple Trapezist for Silver Thorns, in Premium because there are all these Silver Thorn cards. What do you guys think about it?
One of the reasons why I wanted to be on this podcast was I knew it was going to be a loaded question for you, Atlas.
Oh, sure.
And me, I'm actually much more okay with it in general. I think the whole idea of, not getting more support later on, that's not so much a card design problem. That's more of a Bushiroad problem and the ties to the anime. rather than actual card design. Because in theory, they could keep the subclan around forever and just have like maybe 2 subclans for each main clan, and then just keep supporting those. But it's more of a Bushiroad's tied to the anime kind of thing that's kind of messes it up.
So, Bushiroad's specific philosophy on card design is the problem, not like a general.
I think one of the most successful versions of the kind of thing we're talking about is tribal stuff in Magic.
Oh yes.
But like one thing that is nice, that's I think a little different with the tribal stuff in Magic than for what we're talking about with Vanguard, is that the tribal stuff in Magic just kind of, some things just fit into archetypes just by existing. Like, they might not, like, for example, let's talk about the card. There's a card called Deathrite Shaman, which is a very, very, very powerful card. Banned in almost every format now, but ignoring that for a second. But the fact is, it was an elf. And so elf decks were just like, oh, cool, we're just going to play this Deathrite Shaman because it's fucking here. So that made it really nice that it was kind of incidentally good.
Yeah. But to add on to that, and kind of getting onto a bit more of the similarities or the good parts of creating cards that don't work well with other cards, is that in itself is a restriction. Obviously, it's a deck building restriction, and to a degree a playstyle restriction. But what that means for this restriction, it means they have the ability to give this card more varied effects. So it opens up the design space because they have to worry less about previous cards. And also because it has a restriction, it makes it so that they can add overall stronger effects to the cards because there's less ways you can possibly break the card. And it's like Matt gave a very good example of a card that just so happens to be tribal, but fits in most decks. But then you have things like I forgot what they were called exactly, the term for them, were they like lords or something that give like +1/+1s? Yeah, there are tribal cards that are like, hey, give all of this tribe +1/+1s, which really makes you build your deck around focusing on that one. But that effect is actually like pretty good because oftentimes in tribal decks that have those cards, they either are very cheap or come with like another very strong tribal ability attached onto them, which makes so that you can't play these cards don't work with everything, but they are stronger. Their effects are like above the rest overall in the same regards to the same effect.
Right. And one of the lords we're talking about right now in Magic and Standard, they just printed one that's just 2 mana, give all vampires +1/+1. And it is incredibly highly played because, oh, this deck is all vampires. This card's like actually nuts. So, like, a 2 mana 5/5 is insane. I
think in terms of card power and the design of it, I don't think the restriction is necessarily a hindrance to card design. And if anything, I think it helps card design by opening more space. And I know there's like some bad taste in our mouths about something like Magus that never really took off because it was so restricted. But if we look at more recent ones, such as, say, Silver Thorns, that really did take off and are doing pretty well at the moment, even though they're pretty restricted in their names, those cards were just overall, all the cards they got were quality. So even if you couldn't really mesh it very well with all the old support, it still holds its own. And a few cards from Silverthorn also kind of make their ways into other decks too.
I mean, well, because the ones that make their way into other decks are the generic ones, like Rising Dragon, who just gets 10k if you called 2 things this turn. Pretty damn solid card that doesn't care if you got a Silverthorn Vanguard or not. In Premium's case, I kind of just made it an engine, which kind of reminded me of Yu-Gi-Oh!, where you would take this chunk that makes the deck go and stick it in with everything else. Like, I'm still using Flying Peryton and the Chimera that lets you countercharge and Dancing Knife Dancer, but I'm still using, like, Dorian and, like, Zelma and all the other Silverthorn cards that make a pretty cohesive offense on their own, and just everything else is used for advantage.
I'd actually like to... Oh, sorry.
I'm done. Go ahead. No, I'm done.
Sorry, my bad. I'd actually like to add on to that, because that's actually another reason why I do think that having subclans is good actual card design. Because with restrictions and stuff like that, makes so, like I said, it's a deck building restriction.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that make you have to do? It makes you have to be more creative with your deck design to gain similar effects or similar performance with more restricted cards. For example, what you said right now, combining an engine into another deck is a really good example of that. And I think a card game that really shows that this idea of creatively meshing cards that that aren't supposed to be working together to create something amazing through creativity would be Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a deck pretty much at this point designed around archetypes. Like, you can't just play a non-archetypal deck and expect to succeed. But for example, something such as Pendulum Magician. Pendulum Magician is this deck that is this archetype that's been repeatedly hit with the ban list over and over again. Its major cards were pretty much like all gutted for the most part, but the deck still works. One of the reasons why it still works, even after many people thought it was dead, is because they keep meshing different engines together. That although they don't have magicians in their name, so they don't have as much synergy with the rest of the cards, they do something else for it that helps it succeed. And I guess another example also, but this is like more of like a, not necessarily for balance, but for fun reasons. Mm-hmm. One of the most popular formats in Magic the Gathering is Commander, and Commander is a Highlander format, so you can only have one of each card. So that's a major restriction, but people love building Commander decks because of the restriction. It just makes it interesting. How can I accomplish this when there's so much less consistency? How can I accomplish this when, if I lose this one copy of the card, is my deck completely over? I actually think this helps with creative decks making.
There is a kind of a... this is not... So you said that it breeds creativity, and I think this is a pretty interesting talking point, is that and I agree with you. I just want to preface that I think restriction does necessitate some amount of creativity, because you in the sense that you have, you have to kind of do something under a restriction you wouldn't normally have. But it is the question, like, does giving people less options or giving people a clear direction mean more or less creativity? And I think this is kind of a question that, like, a lot of people ask, not just related to card games, but to a lot of different things. I think what also makes these tribal decks or these archetypal decks nice is that it makes it really easy to deck build, in the sense that it makes it easy to get started in deck building, I guess is maybe what I should say. Because you know what direction you want to go, like, right off the bat, if that makes sense.
I mean, deck building in Vanguard is, I think, more streamlined than it is in something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic, because everything... You already have your set ratio of triggers of 16, so that's, like, almost a quarter, a little less of your deck. Like, that's decided for you right off the bat. It just comes down to, okay, 4 heals, what are the other 12? Then you have, like, all strategies are focused around whatever grade 3s you're playing. So when you're making a deck, that's where you start. Now, if you have the subclan grade 3s, like, alright, I'm doing, Lukier and Dorian as my grade 3s, then you see Silver Thorn and you go, okay, what Silver Thorns are there? And then you just look over. Type Silver Thorn into Google, and then you go, okay, this looks like a 4 of, this looks like a 3 of, and then you can use that to continue, deck building and then remove as necessary. Whereas if you look up the full clan, and especially if you're doing this for premium, you're like, wow, that is a lot of cards.
I just kind of want to say, with this set, I definitely understand the premium, but I feel like a lot of the sets were designed with, like, maybe 90% standard in mind and then 10% premium in the back. And when it comes to standard, at this moment, with the addition of subclans, I don't think it's necessarily a big problem, because before the subclans came out, literally you only built the deck one way anyway, and you always built it around your grade 3, so it's not exactly a different thing.
Yeah.
My problem, I guess, if we end up getting more diversity, it could bump up the creativity, and I think this actually does kind of already boost up the deck creativity. One thing I was always thinking about when building Silver Thorns is how many non-Silver Thorns can I get away with, and which ones are most important to keep. Because you can build a full Silver Thorn deck, but you have to play some really suboptimal cards. Like the grade 2 that like goes into the soul gives you 15k shield or something like that. And the grade 2 that's like when you call it, you soul blast everything for 15k power.
That one's awful.
So those cards you typically won't play those. So it has like, okay, what can I put in these slots to most make use of my Silver Thorn cards while not hurting it in the end? And I think that's a creative thinking at the moment in Vanguard compared to before the subclans even came out, where it's pretty much like most decks only really had like one deck list. And actually, if you look at the Silverthorn decks, there's actually quite a lot of variation in the tech cards at the moment.
Oh, sure, but I think what it is I think I just have like the scar of Breakride era subclanery, where a lot of the subclan costs, which we brought up at the beginning of the episode, where all the costs needed the subclan. Versus in Viera, it seems like all the subclan stuff is part of the effect and not part of the cost. So in Breakride era, it was you got a Counterblast and Eradicator, you got a Soul Blast Liberator, that kind of thing. Where that included your triggers, which means you had to go fucking hunting for the triggers again. And in this particular case, it seems like Bushiroad is not doing that, which I am happy about, because it also means that you are able to implement the quote engine into deck building later down the line, because now it's not like, all right, I gotta go find the Silverthorn heal trigger. Where the fuck am I gonna find that? You know,
I wish we had a Silverthorn heal standard.
Well, you just James.
I think it's a really good point that you bring up about how costs were in the old days, where like you had to counterblast, cards with that name or discard cards with that name or something. I think that is the thing we want to avoid.
Yes,
because that makes it hard to. It makes it hard to tech at all.
Yeah.
Like even back during Limit Break era, even in Eradicators, like, so this is like old Limit Break era. Eradicators used to play Draconic Death Scythe because you didn't really have another good option. It was just kill anything you wanted, basically, but it just didn't have Eradicator in it. So when it went into damage, a lot of it was just like, well, this is what I have.
I think Bushiroad's doing a great job with this overall so far, not making it like huge costs. Silver Thorns, there are like some conditions that require Silver Thorns to meet, such as for Lillian, but they built the card, they designed the card so that it's so easy to get the Silver Thorns into your soul, so that you usually don't feel the restriction that often.
Cool.
A lot of the things that are tied to Silverthorn effects are free or just the main point of the effect in the first place. So like Irina's skill when you ride on top of her is check top 3, and then you can put any number of Silverthorns in there. So you're like, okay, I see 2, put 2 in, draw a card, and then if not, it's not like you had to waste a counterblast on it. You're just like, okay, put the rest at the bottom. That's it.
I think this is a good example of card design versus how you design a card, because Silverthorns function very well as a subclan without really like getting in the, not having like, the restriction isn't too bad, and you have the ability to tech in cards that are not part of the subclan, shows that you can design this card design. Repeating myself. The subclan card design isn't necessarily bad for it, the fact that it's restrictive, but rather how Bushiroad chooses to design the cards is way more important than the fact that it requires the same type of cards. If we just take the idea of the whole cost, like Counterblast, same name for the cost thing, that's just like, it's a restriction, but that restriction doesn't have to be there for it to be a subclan. But Bushiroad chooses to put that restriction in. Now for subclans, we have restrictions of you just need to have like a face-up copy of it on the field, or you just need X number in the soul, or you have to just like, I don't know, maybe have one in your hand. I guess that's kind of a discard thing, but they're making them subclans without having as much of a harsh restriction as say the previous ones.
Yeah, like Breakride era.
Yeah. So I think this is the fact that they're able to make a subclan that functions fine and functions well with a few tech cards. Since I don't think any subclan at the moment, except for maybe Magus, has enough to build an entire deck. The fact that you can put in some tech cards in there and it'll still work fine just kind of shows that the problem with the old cards is not the card design of being a subclan, but rather Bushiroad's decisions on how to make subclans.
I see. Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah, and I think, like, building off of that, the other big problem that we have with these archetype cards is that they're usually very poorly supported afterwards, right? Like, as the series moves on and we get new waves of support, like, certain key cards that used to be the focus of card design kind of fall off. Like, you just brought up Magus, well, now we're into Tsukuyomi for OTT, and we had a couple of, like, pity Magus cards thrown into the set, but they weren't exactly deck changing, right? So you had to completely shift focus for the new wave of OTT cards.
Or like in try and build Premium Gear Chronicle, please, I dare you. What sort of cards that need a Chrono Jet Vanguard? Like, what the fuck are you gonna do about that? With it just means you just have to play a G era deck with the new triggers. Like it's very regressive for deck building. One exception to this that I can think of is the G Zone, where for a lot of clans you had strides that just had the name of your intended grade 3, because they're like, ooh, the stride is the future, this is what they could be. So that is a way that you can get around, at least in Premium, that card design flaw with older stuff, where it's like, oh, I need a Vanguard with Harry in the name. Well, good, there's 2 strides with Harry in the name that do, like, incredible things for your battle phase. So having cards like that are, sure, it kind of, cuts off your ability to do it early game, but most of the effects that need Harry for Vanguard are GB1 anyway, so that's invalid. It's still something that allows you to keep at least the archetype support relevant years down the line. Like, I see a lot of people still run Cutie Paratrooper, which needs a Harry Vanguard. I decided not to because she only works when called from Soul. So at least if you draw into Paradin, you can just call it and get a free card anyway.
I'm not gonna lie, when you said Harry, I thought that was a name you just randomly chose out of a hat.
I see what you did there.
You know for a fact that when I use a random guy's name, it's Gary. It is always Gary. I have a mug right next to me that I was been drinking out of for this episode and the episode we recorded before this that has the name.
Drinking?
Yeah, or just, it was a mug. It says Gary on it, and there's a bunch of, like, translations for the name Gary, which I'll put that up on Twitter and Instagram, because I got it from my dead neighbor's estate sale, who, guess what his name was, right?
It was Jerry.
Yes, of course, because Jerry, whatever. Anyway, so, no, I was talking about Harry, like, the...
Yeah, I know. I figured that out right after a second. I was just like, wait.
Look, what I'm saying is that I think having strides with, older archetypes in the name allow you to kind of circumvent that xenophobia problem a little bit.
Well, I kind of want to respond to that a bit. I do think the fact that if they don't get like future supports for the subclan, that is kind of a card design problem. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I said earlier, this is much more of a Bushiroad problem, because they can easily fix this. Just pick like 2 subclans and the general clan, and just keep giving them support throughout time. It's just Bushiroad's tie to this anime is what makes it annoying, which it's not the fault of subclans, it's the fault of Bushiroad.
Well, of course.
And also, there's nothing stopping them from continuing to support the archetypes in the anime, but they, like, don't.
It's like even Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't tie to the anime this much. If anything, the anime is built around the card game.
For Yu-Gi-Oh?
Yeah. If anything. It's tough because
Like when we were talking, we were like kicking around this idea before the recording, and James brought up a point where he said, "I think Xenophobia is fine because it helps create design space and deck variety without creating a brand new clan."
Yeah, like, because a lot of these archetypes will take the overall gimmick of the clan and do it in a very specific way.
Yeah. And if we don't like Xenophobia, the ultimate form of Xenophobia is a new clan, essentially.
Oh yeah,
Right. Which, thankfully, they're not doing again.
I think they've kind of realized they've reached like this critical amount where like they can't possibly balance these many clans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they have there's 24 of them, right? So
Yes.
That's a lot.
that is a lot.
That
of
is,
constantly
in fact, a lot.
Yeah.
Bushiroad, like Konami generally just like they choose like pick like 5 clans and decide to give them support for a while, and then they switch to the next 5, and occasionally give legacy support that like only like 1 out of every 20 legacy support actually matters.
Yeah.
Yep. And usually it'll be main characters from previous anime.
Oh, poor Dark Magician though. He got wrecked.
Don't say that, the Yu-Gi-Oh fans will come get us.
Here,
No,
They can't touch
anyone who's legit Yu-Gi-Oh fan has to feel bad for Blackluster Soldier.
Oh my
Archetype was
god.
awful. I beat it with like my 5-year-old Noble Knight deck. It was pretty sad.
Gross.
Nexus at Night, the Yu-Gi-Oh podcast. I don't know. I just like bothers me, but it doesn't bother me.
I think what bothers you is how Bushiroad handles it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Because here's the thing: there's 24 clans. What they could be doing is you have sets of 3 clans per set get support, right? You could just be doing. You have 24 clans that goes into to 3 evenly. You have just over the course of 8 sets. You have 3 in each set, and then that would just be like a good way to do round robin. But they're so wonky about it that it just it comes out weird. And then
Yeah.
especially if your stuff is xenophobic and it's not very good, like that's not just a shot in the foot. That's shots in both feet and 1 in the crotch. Like it's just not. Like then you have to wait for even longer than you normally would have.
Mm-hmm. And then there are cases with like the duplicate clans where you can make an argument that some of this is already kind of taking place with all of the duplicate clans, like the 3 different paladins or Kagero and Narukami.
That's true. Why aren't the paladins just subclans of each other?
Right?
I'm not entirely sure. Well, Gold Paladin apparently.
They all focus on calling and building a board.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
In Gold Paladin's case, at least during
Like
that.
gold are different now.
No, but like back in the day, Gold's whole thing was that Royal and Shadow Paladin get like sealed away by Link Joker, and Gold Paladin is the remnants of both that came together as one.
but
Like it's so dumb.
Doesn't that literally mean they're a subclan of the Royal
Yes,
and
that's
Shadow Paladin?
exactly what I'm getting at.
But also,
Yeah.
like, Shadows and Royals are very similar, aside from the retire gimmick.
It
And
just
they're
comes-
both Force clans, too.
Yeah. It just
At
comes
least,
down
like,
to
modern Gold Paladin has the different gift type to kind of separate it.
I'd say their playstyle's pretty different too.
Well, it just comes
But
down to
different enough.
what you're doing with those cards. In Royal's cases, it's just I'm making these big, and in Shadow's cases, it's I'm eating these to make one thing big. That's it.
And Gold Paladin is just trying to cheat in the game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's okay. Kirf got banned.
Yep. Which listen
How's
to our,
Richard taking it?
I haven't talked to him yet, but I plan to, and I kind of can't wait. I also haven't talked to Gabe about OTT yet because he played that. Also, he plays Neonectar though, so I get the feeling he's going to be torn. He's like, I don't know.
He loves Neonectar though, and he's like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure he'll be fine.
he'll be okay. The joke at the beginning of the episode was earlier we were talking about how in France after the French Revolution they're like, we're done with kings, and then Napoleon comes in, picks up the crown and goes, thank you very much, and then fucks up Europe for the next few years.
And then they exiled him, and he immediately just walks back to the French outpost like, hey, I'm still emperor. You want to shoot me?
Yeah.
No? Alright, let's go invade the capital, and I'm going to be emperor again.
Well, because like they didn't fire all of the people who were loyal to him.
Yeah.
So they're like, hey, buddy, you're back. He's like, I am. Can I come? Yeah, please. By all means, have at it.
And then he was just emperor again.
Easy.
Nexus at Night, the history podcast. Let's see. Go ahead.
So going back to the topic, the main topic, what Alice just said about how support is distributed, I think I've already made my stance pretty clear. I think subclan problems are really just Bushiroad problems. But I also want to address, because I totally agree with what Alice is saying here, about how Bushiroad distributes supports for clans and how it affects subclans. One in particular is something that we've seen early on already for something such as Nubatama, where although they didn't have two subclans in the early on, they essentially had two very different strategies, but both of them were taking away support from them, from the card slots in the set. So you have these cards that work with one strategy but not really the other, and cards that work with this other strategy but not really with the other. And now overall your support is mediocre. And I feel like this is something Bushiroad would really need to address if they start adding in subclans. Like if they just, especially since like they're also competing with each other for like triple R slots and double R slots.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is like we've already seen with the Mega support that they're not doing that.
Yeah.
They gave you like two cards. The two cards had okay but really mediocre effects and don't really advance the current win conditions. Just like, yeah, we remember this exists. We slapped its name onto these two cards.
I think what they should maybe do that might help with this whole problem of subclans dividing the support between strategies is maybe bring back the clan boosters, maybe.
I'm not really sure.
I mean, we technically have that in the form of Bermuda sets, but
okay, sure, but that's Bermuda.
And that works so well.
I still don't get why they don't just put Bermuda with everything else. Like, there's no reason not to.
Money.
At this point, it just feels like tradition, where they were just like
tradition of getting money.
Yeah, isn't that what all traditions are for? Yeah, exactly. The other thing I don't think you brought this up. You said biggest issue is spaces in each set support each subclan archetype. / archetype.
Yeah. Didn't I just bring that up?
Yeah, but that was all of the things you said, because like we talked about tribal support, we talked about the stronger effects with the downside of being in a subclan. So, little thought experiment here. For some clans, they never really got the subclan treatment. Like, Great Nature never really got it until Honorary Professor, and that was so late and was kind of an afterthought. Nubatama had, like, sure, a Stealth Dragon, but that wasn't very cohesive either. Stuff like that. Do you think that them not getting those things helped them in terms of just being better off when it came to less good support? I know that sounds wordy, but what I mean is that these clans, whenever they got like medium to medium plus support, it was easier to implement with their entire library of stuff. So I think they had an easier time stabilizing than with something like Pale Moon or Gold Paladin or whatever, where all of their good stuff was subclan related, and then when they got more generic stuff that wasn't, it just kind of like kneecapped them for a while.
Yeah, I think it was a lot. I think you're pretty close to, because it was clans that like really came out during the Limit Break era or during the Break Rate era, where they started introducing subclans in a really big way.
Yeah.
That kind of like Gold Paladin is a great example. That was like all Liberators all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so when you get something that's like, when they're like, okay, here's a new Gold Paladin archetype, you're like, well, all the old cards are useless.
Yeah, early G era is a good example of this with Gold Paladin, because you're like, all right, I have my Legion Liberator stuff, and I have Gurgit, which is like whatever. So, you're just kind of sitting there. Meanwhile, something like Great Nature in early G era was really good, because you just go, all right, I take Crayon Tiger, I take all the other stuff I had that involves killing my things to draw cards, and all this new stuff is about killing things to draw cards. And then I use Mana Garm, and you die. Like, it just meshed together so much easier because there was no, like, walls in place from before.
I guess one point we can bring up that's a little bit different from a pure archetype is when it revolves around the specific grade 3, because you brought up Honorary Professor. A lot of that support came in the form of new grade 3s and cards that supported those grade 3s, so you still had room to use more generic cards with them.
Yeah.
I don't think that would really even count as a full-blown archetype or something.
It definitely counts as an archetype. It doesn't really count as a subclan. To me, a subclan is something that involves triggers with... Okay, well, the old definition, I guess, is involving triggers with that name. So, if it's something that revolves around, like, your Vanguard being X thing, then it's an archetype. If it revolves around, like, rear guards and, like, stuff like that, it's a subclan.
Yeah, I'm more used to the Yu-Gi-Oh definition of archetype,
which is
more prominent there. Anything with the name.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think because Yu-Gi-Oh...
Vanguard is weird.
Well, just because Yu-Gi-Oh isn't split into clans to begin with. So...
You have types like warriors and attributes like dark.
Yeah.
Which, if you happen to be a dark warrior, you're in luck, because all their support is like pretty good.
Oh, yeah. No, dark stuff and, Dark Armed Dragon. Shout out to Teledad format, which is where I came into Yu-Gi-Oh! And then I left during Inzectors. I picked the best time to come in. Man. Yu-Gi-Oh's
Fucking
terrible.
Inzectors, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
One turn formats.
Nothing like board breaking. So, yeah, I know this is a little bit of like a maelstrom of stuff to talk about, but I think it's something that people should consider when it comes to looking at card design and looking at how they build their decks and how they complain to Bushiroad, because we do that all the time. That's literally what this podcast is for.
Yeah, Nexus at Night, the complaining podcast.
Well, yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, that's
That's not even a lie.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, I know my opinion differs a lot from, like, the norm on this, because I know, like, a lot of people, especially in Magic, do like tribal stuff. I actually really dislike tribal stuff in Magic. Mostly for the reason that I think it's... I don't know, there's something about me that finds it kind of boring. Because, like, tribal decks are necessarily full of creatures, and I don't really like casting creatures.
I see.
So, I just, like, automatically don't like tribal stuff. But what I really hate about tribal stuff is how it affects limited formats in Magic, like Draft. I just think it makes really boring Draft formats.
Okay.
So, that's one problem I have with it. But it's like, of course, part's not relevant to Vanguard. But I do like doing more silly things than just matching cards with the same names.
Same.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Generally has that, just because you're mixing archetypes together, just because archetypes are stupid.
Yeah, but you also have in Yu-Gi-Oh! You have, like, staples that no matter what deck you're playing, i.e. Ash Blossom or whatever.
But archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! Aren't really, like, full decks. They're more like just engines.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And you just attach them in weird ways to create these bizarre contraptions that are dumb.
I think it depends on which deck, because some decks just straight up don't work. Like Ghost Tricks, you have to play in a Ghost Tricks deck, or just do like one tech card.
Yeah, but if you look at something like Zodiac, right? You're like, all right, put these 4 cards in my deck, and these few cards in my extra deck, and bam, here's my +6.
That's a much larger problem with more modern Yu-Gi-Oh. Like before, like early, like maybe like a bit before the Pendulum era. That's where like archetypes were at their strongest. And speaking of archetypes at their strongest, for subclans in Vanguard, I really feel like Bushiroad has to make a choice. Go all in on the subclans, or just don't.
Yeah.
Because they kind of like, dip their feet in and then take their feet out. But if they just committed to it, just had like a few dedicated subclans for each clan, as well as some generic support you can splash in or make a generic deck, then I think it would work out fine.
Yeah, I think don't do the thing you did with like G-era Murakumo, where you have like 5 different archetypes while also like not supporting the clan ever. That shit pisses me off to no end. Where they're like, we're going to do this, and a little bit of this, and a little bit of this, and just none of it's good.
Oh, sweet zombie Jesus. So, I don't really have like that much left to say about this. I just think it was something that was fun to talk about. Guys, anything else to bring up?
Not really. Kind of agree with James, and given Bushiroad's history of supporting things, I'm kind of leaning on please just make generic cards or cards that revolve around a specific grade 3, because that's easier to both support in the future and also to just kind of do away with.
For me, I'm a little worried about how they're going to approach this, especially since we're seeing Nagus isn't receiving much more support or at all. But I do have some hope, because one thing that's great about a format reboot is you come back in starting the format with a lot more experience, which is something Yu-Gi-Oh! Should totally do, but they refuse to do it.
But links were supposed to slow the game down.
They gave... I thought... We had all thought they learned their lesson about hard once per turns, but I guess not. Looking at you, Firewall Dragon.
I mean, they on paper, it made sense, but it just didn't matter. And
no, it didn't. On paper, it just slowed down all the top decks slightly, but they completely gutted all the non-top decks.
That's what I'm saying, on paper. It slowed the game down.
It slowed the game down by, like, one turn.
It slowed the game down mostly for the proletariat and not for the bourgeoisie, which is what they should have done. Because Vanguard is now communism. Alright, that means that I am officially out of material because I am talking about communism. Guys, where can people find you out there on the internet?
Find me at Wiggums, 2Gs, 2Zs, eat the rich.
You can find me at Plasma Eclipse, and I will be seizing the means of production.
James?
You can find me by talking to these guys, I guess.
Okay. You can find me personally at Atlas Novak on Twitter or Instagram. Eat the Rich is a criminally underrated Aerosmith song because, of course, I'm going to turn it on its head. You can also find this podcast at Nexus at Night on Twitter or Instagram. And if you are in the LA area this Saturday, August 31st, 2019, I will be on the Pussy Riot show at the Dow Comedy Studio at 8 p.m. doing 15 minutes of material coming through. I'd be happy to see whoever wants to. And until next time, I was Atlas.
I'm Matt.
I'm Root Beer.
I'm James.
And have a good night, everybody.